Because this is a long video, I'm going to provide a very quick abstract. So a bunch of us got together, grad students, undergrads, high school students, and we got together virtually during the pandemic. And we met across an entire year, met weekly. And what we did is we designed a novel research experiment. And this was a research experiment that had never been ran before, and it was based off of prior literature, which I'll describe in this video later on. And using that prior literature, we designed a device, and this is the device, and what it does is it has a photoresistor which detects light, and then it converts it to vibrations that you feel. And what people did in our experiment is that they sat blindfolded in a dark room, and then there was a light source, and what they had to do was use their finger to try to find the location of that light source. The research question that we asked, which again has not been fully addressed in the literature, is number one, what is the distribution of people who feel like the device is an extension of themselves? How many people feel like they're merged with this piece of technology that's on their hands? Is it 1 in a million, or is it a whole bunch of people? And what we were surprised to find is that just within 2 minutes, a few people actually felt fully merged with this device over here. We found that there was a wide distribution of people and their perceptual experiences. The second question that we had is, if we gave like extended exposure time and exploration time with this device, did more people feel fully merged with the device? And statistically, we found significant results where with greater exposure time, people actually felt more merged with the device. Now we had a few other research questions which you can discover later in the video. Hi, my name is Vivek Anand and I'm a research scientist in the Ashton Grabeel Spatial Orientation Lab at Brandeis University, and I'm also currently funded by the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. So this video is going to be like an exciting video because in it I'm going to share a pilot study with preliminary data, and it's on novel research. So it's research that's relevant to what I research, which is spatial disorientation, and it's also relevant to things like human augmentation, sensory substitution, vibrotactile feedback, and I'm going to talk about all of this in just a little bit, and also something called distal attribution. And really the underlying question that we'll be exploring in this video and what our pilot study will be based on is the general question of what is the distribution of people who feel merged with a machine, who if I put sensors on you or I put vibrotactors, little things that vibrate on your skin, how many people are going to feel merged with that device? Is it 1 in a million? Or is it many? Does everyone feel merged with it? And so these are ideas and questions that are important in the topic of augmenting the human using technology. Now what's really exciting, this is why I'm so excited, is that this pilot study was made possible because of collaborators. And these collaborators span from graduate students to a bunch of undergrads to even high school students. And I should just take a step back and just give you the storyline. So the pandemic, COVID-19, hit. And since then, for the full year plus after that, I was not allowed to run any human subjects, any human participants in my experiments. And I was like, oh man, I can't collect any data. And the experiment that I was going to start was on the topic of vibrotactile feedback, which again, I'll describe in just a second. So then, as the pandemic began, I was like, oh man, what do I do? And one idea was, what if we assemble a group of people who meets virtually? And then as we meet virtually, we design an experiment that we each independently run in our homes, okay? And then from there we collect data and then bring it together and discover something new, something exciting, something interesting. So that's why this is kind of a cool project, because this is the summary of that sort of year-long adventure that we've been on. So the collaborators came from two places. The first is this club, TRIG, the Technology Research Interdisciplinary Group, and also from a quantitative biology course that I taught on human augmentation. I taught it virtually over the year. So as a very quick table of contents, first I will do a very fast introduction into my research. That's not the focus of this video, my research, so I'm just going to run through it just to give you a slight taste of the motivation. Then we'll go through a literature review because the experiment that we designed is built off of prior work. And so having a sense of what that prior work is will help you understand what this experiment is about. Then we'll provide research questions and hypotheses, and then finally the methods that we developed and the apparatus that we created, including sort of like the programming and then all the details and the procedure. Then we'll give you the results and the conclusion. So if you look at like the little bar at the bottom, there should be chapters, so you can skip to whatever interests you. So again, the concentration for today's presentation is not my research, so I'm going to go through it very quickly. If you're interested in actually understanding my research, then in the description I'll put a link to a video that goes through this much more thoroughly. But the general pitch is that imagine that you are an astronaut and you're going on your way to Mars. You spend months and months in 0G, right, where the concept of up doesn't exist, and then all of a sudden a day comes when you have to land upon the surface of Mars, and all of a sudden then where up is a matter of life and death. And what we know is that as astronauts transition from outer space in 0G to the surface of Mars, that transition, astronauts will become very susceptible to spatial disorientation. It just means that they won't really know where up is. And this can lead to fatalities. In fact, it does lead to fatalities in military pilots. So it's a serious thing. So again, I'm going to skip through all of my research. The only one main thing I want you to remember is that what I do is I strap living humans into this machine, and then I have one condition, this one right over here, that I call my spaceflight analog condition. And people have to balance, and again, I'm not going to go into the science of it, but long story short, they get very disoriented, they don't know where they are, it's very difficult to balance, and this is because they cannot rely on gravitational information, very similar to what astronauts and military pilots may experience. So that's the motivation, that's the research that I do. Now, one of the ideas that I had, for the next type of research that I would do is, well, okay, if there's a certain gravitational information that's missing, what if we're able to replace that information with information from a different sensory system? So for example, this is an image from the Army, and the research that they're doing is with helicopter pilots who get disoriented. And what you see here, this pilot is wearing a belt, and the belt has a bunch of little vibrators on them that vibrate, okay? And so the idea is that, let's say the helicopter pilot is tilting relative to gravity, let's say tilting to the left. Well, then the vibrators on the left will vibrate, informing him that, oh, you're far away from the vertical. So even though his vestibular system may not be detecting that, he is now detecting that through his skin. Okay, so that's one of the things that people are looking at. It was going to be, something along the lines of what I do with my own research, but then it stopped because of the pandemic. Now, what's really interesting is that this is related to the topic of sensory substitution, and I'll slow a little bit down here to give you a quick review of this idea. And this idea is the following. I'll give you a hypothetical first. Imagine that you have vision and then you lost it, okay? Right as you lose it, maybe something, you injured your eyes, you still have all of the neural machinery in your brain that can process information that would have come through your eyes. And really all that is a series of electrical signals that are going to the back to your brain. So the idea is that, okay, even though your eyes cannot send those electrical signals, what if you could send that same pattern of information through your skin? And then that goes and is processed by the visual parts of your brain. And that's the idea of sensory substitution. You take one sense that may not be working as you want it to and replace it with another sense. So in my research, your vestibular system may not be working properly or how you want it to work, so you replace it through vibrations on the skin. With this example, your eyes may not be working, so you replace it by information through your skin. But it could be information through your ears or any of your other sensory systems. Okay, so what are some examples of sensory substitution? So here's one example. Someone sits on a dentist chair. You can see over here there are 400 little pokey things that poke right into your back. And what happens is someone who cannot see, someone who's blind, or you blindfold them, sits in this chair. They have control over a movie camera, and whatever the movie camera sees, it converts that into a bunch of pokes on your back. So for example, if you are just seeing a square, then what you're going to feel on your back is a bunch of pokes in the shape of a square. And what's interesting is that if people use this to explore their environment for 20 to 40 hours, they become proficient at being able to recognize up to 25 objects. Now that's kind of cool. What was really interesting, what really got me thinking about it, was that there were some anecdotal reports that people felt like they completely merged the device, that they no longer felt the pokes, like they were no longer concentrating the pokes. They felt as if everything was coming from outside, almost as if they're seeing again. And that blew my mind. It blew my mind that someone could feel that at oneness with the device. So, and these are just different reports of people talking about that. So one of the questions I had was like, how minimal can that information be? What if you're not as immersive as 400 pokey things on your back? What if it's less? And so people tried that. People tried doing like 144 little shocky things on your tongue. Same idea, you have a camera, you move it around, and whatever the camera sees, like an X, that X shape, you get an X-shaped shock on your tongue through this device. And again, people reported saying that they felt that the information was coming from outside, and it wasn't just a series of shocks in their tongue, and that they're merging with the device. And then they tried it with people with leprosy who lose sensation on their fingertips, and they put little force detectors on each of the fingertips and then wired that to 5 little shockers on the forehead. And again, like if you put this pinky down, then maybe one of them would shock you on your forehead, and over time people start saying that yes, I feel like I'm merged with this device. I don't really feel the sensations that much on my forehead. I feel like things are actually coming from outside as I'm pushing it, as if it's an actual sense of touch that they have lost. I was like, whoa, that's amazing. And so, the final paper, and this is what sort of our experiment is based off of, is just one little vibrator that they're using to explore the world. And again, the underlying question of this video is how many people feel merged with this device? First of all, is it possible to feel merged with just one little vibration? And secondly, how many people feel merged with it? So this particular paper, Punya is going to describe in detail.
Hi everyone, my name is Punya, and I'm a class of 2021 graduate at Lexington High School in Massachusetts. And I aspire to be a research scientist as well as a bioengineer in the future. I want to focus on oncology, genetics, molecular biology, and this project and reading this research paper that I'm going to talk to you about has definitely been pursuing my passion. Okay, so the paper I'm going to talk to you about today is called Technology and Perception, the Contribution of Sensory Substitution Systems. And this is by Lenay and his colleagues. Okay, so what was the actual goal of the research paper? Essentially was trying to see how minimal sensory substitution devices could be that was talked about earlier in the video. And the important thing is that we need to do this while still allowing the subject to feel merged with the device. So the paper explored merging with the device, and the definition of that is actually making the device feel as though it's an extension of oneself. Okay, so the details of the experiments, which I'll explain in further detail with this device on my arm, essentially that there's a first simple photoelectric cell, and that's fixed on the right hand end of the subject, and that's connected to a vibrator. And so the vibrator has a pretty on-off reaction, and it's 0 or 1 in that sense. And once it crosses a threshold that's set by the photoelectric cell, that captures light, and then that causes the vibrator to turn on or off. And there were 3 different experiments conducted in the paper, and they each had different results. Okay, so this is the device on my arm, and here's a photoelectric cell in my pointer, and this is what detects light. So as a subject in the experiment, I'm blindfolded, and I have to essentially detect an object. And so this is the photoelectric cell that once it crosses a threshold of light, that activates this vibrator right here. And this would be, in the experiment tucked under, so I can actually feel the, the tingling, the sensation on my arm. And then this is just a microprocessor and a breadboard. So this is essentially how the paper structured their device. So in the first experiment that we looked at in the paper, the subject was placed in a dark room, and this apparatus was set up, and they were blindfolded, and they were instructed to, without moving, translationally, they could rotate in a circle. They had to try to detect where the object was using the photoresistor and the vibrations. And so the interesting thing was that the subject was, first of all, able to find the light target. They were able to find the direction and approximate distance, as well as they were able to have a basic judgment of what the volume and depth was of this supposed object. And the subject, again, wasn't made aware that it was light. They just, had to detect whatever it was that they were finding in the space around them. And I think the most important thing out of this first experiment was that the subject was able to sense the presence of this object that was located in a space outside of himself. And that essentially caused the tactile simulation to become subliminal. So it became subconscious, and the person essentially forgot about this device, and they were one with the device. They merged with the device, which is our goal. Okay, so the conclusions from the first two experiments were that depth, which is a form of commitment, according to the paper, it arises from the subject feeling within or inside the perceived space around them. So as a subject, I need to feel like I'm part of this space and I'm within it. And the actions that the subject takes, whether it's moving the wrist, the finger, they have to take place in the actual perceived space, and they can't be linked to feeling depth. They have to be consistently integrated. And the key principles that we understood from all three experiments were one of them was the concept of free exploration. And what that means is letting the subject be able to explore the space around them and allowed to have permanent activity. And that is a crucial aspect to merge with a device, because these actions kind of opened up access to a variety of paths and sensations. The subject had to consistently be moving, because if they ceased to move, that resulted in a loss of spatialization, which meant that they didn't exactly know what space they were in at that point. They weren't able to detect the object anymore. And so the stimulation also had to vary through the tilting in the hand and the wrist, and that allowed the perception of this light target. Okay, so learning from coupling devices as this device is that it's crucial to forget the device's presence, which is the concept behind perceptive learning. You forget that the device is there, you merge with the device, and then you're able to freely use it. And mastering of the tool makes it disappear from consciousness, which is very important, because once you master it, you're able to use it freely. And we don't actually know how many trials it would take for a person to learn how to use this perfectly, but that is something we want to explore in the future. We also want to continue, according to the paper, producing technical devices to add dimensions to human perception. And I think that was one of the main goals of the paper as well. Okay, so there are also certain prospects for experimentation again in the future. So this paper had the goal to understand the dynamic nature of perception, and the experiments we conducted also had the same goal. And sensory substitution in general will force us to reevaluate senses in terms of sensory motor relations. So what this means is that if I say I'm seeing, nobody can assume that I'm seeing with the eye. Sensory substitution will force us to, make the definition of a sense, seeing with the eye, is you have to be specific. So seeing with the eye, seeing with the fingers, seeing with the tongue, seeing with, through sensory substitution. And these different cognitive technologies allow us to do that. So our conclusions were that one vibrotactile, such as this one in the paper, allowed the subject to merge with the device. Our critique of the paper was that they only ran one subject, one male subject. And the open question we have, of course, is that is the subject merging with the device a 1 in 1 million chance, or does everyone feel this? And that is exactly what we're going to be exploring with our experiment in this device. Thank you.
And just as a quick summary, the idea was that all you need is just one little vibration, and people, or this one person, actually began to feel like he was merged with the device. And by that, he stopped really feeling the sensation on his hand, and instead felt like it was coming from outside. that almost like his fingertip had a little eye on it, and you felt like there's something out there that you're sensing for reals, as opposed to just focusing on the vibrations. Now, again, we don't know, as Punya had said, whether this is 1 in a million or if a lot of people experience this. And the next paper that sort of kind of addresses this is this really awesome paper by Seigal and Warren. So they use the exact same setup. They have a photoresistor on their fingertip that can detect a light source. So if it, and they have a little vibrator on. So, no vibration, no vibration, no vibration. And then, oh, there's a light source and it starts to vibrate. And then as you move away, no vibration, no vibration. So they have the same exact setup. And what they were interested in exploring was whether a particular instruction type would affect how accurate a person would be in detecting how far away an object is and reporting how far away it is. And also whether they would feel the instructions that they got, whether that would enhance the feeling that they've merged with a device. And this is called, again, distral attribution. So they gave 2 different instructions. Group 1 got a cognitive strategy. To group 1, they said, hey, pay attention to the vibration on your skin that you're feeling. Pay attention to which way your finger is pointing, and use those 2 things to tell me where is that light source and how far away is that light source. And their hypothesis was that this group would not perform as well on the task. And then the second group was given a perceptual strategy. And for them, they were actually explicitly told, don't pay attention to the vibrations on your skin. I mean, you can use them, but try not to focus on that. Try to generate an intuitive sense of where that target is. And their hypothesis was this intuitive group would actually feel more merged with the device and would be more accurate in indicating how far away they thought the object was. So their method, again, was very similar to the Lenay paper. You take a person, blindfold them, put them in a dark room, and then you have a light source somewhere in that room, and they need to find it. And they use their finger, and they just are searching for where that is, and when their finger is pointing at that light source, they feel a vibration on their skin. They were also asked 3 questions. So the first question they were asked is, how much attention are you paying to your arm? They also asked how much the target felt like a solid object. And again, this was supposed to relate how merged they felt with an object. If you don't feel merged with an object, then you're probably going to say, oh, there's nothing out there. It doesn't feel solid. It's just something imaginary. I just feel vibrations on my skin. But if you feel merged with the device, if you feel like you're one with the device, then to you there is something real out there, so that when your finger points to it, you're like, oh, I feel something solid. There's an actual sense that they have. And so they feel like this device then becomes an extension of their own existence, and they're actually experiencing something in real life. So that's the idea. People who feel merged with the device, they will probably say that object feels solid. So this is the main result right over here for what I'm interested in. They had many other really cool findings, and so you can check the paper out if you're interested. And so the only thing I really want you to pay attention to in this graph is how much people felt how solid the object was. Again, people who felt the object was not solid, who rated zeros, probably did not feel like they were merged with the device. And you can see there's a whole bunch of people there. And then people who rated feeling as if the object was very solid, there were a whole bunch of people there. Again, the main takeaway from this figure for what I'm interested in is that this suggests that there is a wide distribution of experiences with feeling merged. Some people do, and some people do not. And it's not just 1 in a million that feel merged with the device. Now, again, this is just a motivating thing that I found in the literature because they had 2 different groups with 2 different instructions. It's hard to know if the distribution would just sort of arise from just one instruction set. And also, it took 2 hours for them, each person, to experience this. And so what we also don't know is, would it work for smaller exposure times and what the learning rates are going to be. So these are all going to be the things that we will explore in our pilot study. The next exciting question was something that came up in our discussions during our club brainstorming sessions. And that was around personality. are there particular personality types who tend to feel merged with devices more? And again, this is kind of an interesting question. If you're an astronaut and all of a sudden you've got all these different sensors on you, maybe one that's telling you how far away you're from vertical, are there personality types that will allow you to merge with these devices faster? This stuff is just not known at all. So one of the first things that I did, or we did, looked at the literature. And there was some literature that looked at different personality traits and immersion, the feeling of being immersed in some environment. So for example, this paper found that personality traits like openness to experiences, neuroticism, and extroversion were positively related to feeling immersed, this immersion tendency. And that was cool, but what I really wanted to do was see if I could find any papers that were looking at some sort of experience where a person feels merged with something that's not part of who they are. And so the idea that I came up with of searching was a rubber hand illusion. And if you don't know what the rubber hand illusion is, look it up on YouTube. There are some videos that are just 1 or 2 minutes long. It's worth watching because it's an interesting illusion. So what happens is that the person, will be sitting, and the experimenter will have you take your arm and put it underneath the table. And then on top of the table, they'll put a rubber hand or a plastic hand, whatever. They'll put a fake hand on top of the table. And then what the experimenter will do is they'll start stroking your hand underneath the table. And as they're stroking your hand underneath the table, synchronized, they're stroking this fake hand on top of the table. And then at some point, what they'll do is they'll smash the fake hand. And some people will freak out. They'll pull out their hand, even though their hand wasn't smacked at all, because they extended their identity onto this fake hand. To them, that felt like a real attack on their hand. So it's really interesting that this happens. And so, I found this one paper over here where they found a relationship between people who feel very, they're very susceptible to the rubber hand illusion. They happen to also be very high on sensory suggestibility. And sensory suggestibility is this idea that you suggest someone that they're feeling something even though they're not, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm feeling that. So for example, some examples are you take a hot plate. It's off, but you tell the person it's on. And then what the person does is they have their hand like up here and they start to lower. And you say, keep lowering it until you feel like some heat coming from this. And people who are very suggestible will say very early on, very high up, oh, I'm feeling it. Whereas people who are not suggestible will come down quite low, maybe even touch it because it's off, and say that, oh, I don't feel any heat. And you can do this for all senses. You can do it for hearing. You can take a watch that's ticking, and even though it's not making any noise, you tell the person, tell me when you hear that ticking sound. And so you keep bringing it closer until they say they hear it. Or you could do it with odors. You have a smell, and in reality there's no smell, but you just tell them, tell me when you smell something. Okay, and you just keep bringing it close and see at what point do they say that. So that is interesting. And so the underlying question that we had is, are people who are suggestible, who have sensory suggestibility, who rank high in being suggestible, are they the same people who feel merged with our device? That was sort of another question that we had. There's some other, before moving on to the methods, the other interesting papers was that you can induce the rubber hand illusion through vibrotactile sensation. That was kind of interesting. The other one that was kind of interesting is that ASMR now is becoming more famous. And, these people found a, relationship between people who have high sensory suggestibility and also people who experience ASMR.
Hello, my name is Ethan Knapp. I am a recent graduate of Brandeis University in the class of 2021, and I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Neuroscience, and I plan on going off to medical school in about a year.
Hi, my name is Janet Orozco, and I'm also part of the class of 2021, and I majored in neuroscience and plan on pursuing a PhD in neuroscience as well. And as we approached our research and experiment, we asked some questions. So we're gonna just share screen, and we formed some hypotheses for them as well. So our first question is, what is the distribution of people who feel like the device is an extension of themselves? And after digging into the Seigal paper, we discovered that we should expect there to be a wide distribution. And our next question is, would people feel like the device is an extension of themselves after only several minutes of exposure? And based on the Lenay paper, we expect this to be possible.
And so we know from the Lenay paper that after only several minutes, as Janet just mentioned, people will start to feel merged with the device. But the question is now whether greater exposure time will lead to a greater merging with the device. And based on prior sensory substitution literature, we know that training seems to be crucial in this process. So we would hypothesize that increased training would lead to an increased feeling of merging with the device for these individuals. And our final research question that we wanted to ask is whether there's a relationship between a person's sensory suggestibility and how much they feel the device is an extension of themselves. This is important because we want to know what makes certain individuals more suggestible to sensory substitution than others. And whether this is sensory suggestibility or other personality traits that can affect one's suggestibility to that is a really good question. And we haven't really dug into the latter, being personality traits. However, in this present experiment, we wanted to focus on sensory suggestibility in particular. And based on prior literature, we've seen that this may be true, and that there may very well be a relationship between sensory suggestibility and how much an individual feels like they are merging with the device, and how much that device is an extension of themselves.
To answer those questions, we decided to build an apparatus, a device. And this device is exactly the same thing that Lenay and Seigal, what they had built. So it had a photoresistor that detects light and then converts it to vibrations. So Tanmay is going to give an overview of what our device looks like and a little bit of the programming. And again, none of us had built this before, and so we're all sort of in our own individual homes doing video conferencing, trying to troubleshoot and build this device that we can then test out on our family or whoever's living with us. After Tanmay's presentation, I will talk about the other methods, like the procedure and what are the different questions and things that we asked while doing the experiment.
So now I'm going to talk a bit more about the apparatus and the programming behind it. First, I'll tell you guys a little bit about me. My name is Tanmay. I'm in 10th grade right now in high school, and I have many interests related to trig, including physics, math, and computer science. First, I'll give you guys a general overview of the hardware. So we start with the light source here, and that's on, and when the photoresistor detects some light, it sees the brightness level, and it transmits that information to the Arduino. And then in the code, which I'll explain a bit later, it decides, the Arduino, whether that level is above a certain threshold that we set. And if it is, then it turns on the vibrotactile. Otherwise, the vibrotactile will be off. And that information is transmitted to the skin of the person. They feel it vibrating or not. And based on that information, they can keep moving if they haven't detected it yet. And then when they detect the target, they'll see, oh, the vibrotactile is on. This is a resource that we used, you can see the link here, for the code fragment for the photoresistor. And you can see a wiring diagram of how the photoresistor will be connected in the circuit here. And then for the vibrotactile, we actually coded that ourselves, so that the threshold thing, which I'll explain in a minute. So now we see the picture of the apparatus on an actual person. So the person would first put on the compression sleeve, and then we'd put the Arduino and the breadboard on top of the compression sleeve. And then the photoresistor would be attached to their pointer, so they can point around with the photoresistor to detect the brightness levels. And then the vibrotactile would be tucked into their compression sleeve, so that they can feel the vibrotactile vibrating against their skin. And finally, I'll talk a bit about the software, the primary code that makes the apparatus run. So it starts by reading in a value, which is the brightness level from the photoresistor, and then it prints that out to the serial monitor. Then what it does is it says, oh, is that value greater than 100 in this case, which is the threshold? And if so, it'll turn on the vibrotactile. Otherwise, the vibrotactile will be off. And then just to reiterate again, that value of 100 is the threshold. And we have to manually set that for each environment because we don't want the vibrotactile to be on just for ambient light, only when it's pointing in the area of the target. And then right here, you guys can see an example of this serial monitor. These two lines here, they would be printing and it would look like this. Thanks for listening.
So here is the methods section. And before the participant came in, we had a little bit of setup to do. So first of all, what we had to do was calibrate the threshold at which the photoresistor worked at. And for that, because we're each in our own different rooms, in our own houses, so this would be different, and so we had to adjust the threshold for each environment. And really the goal was that you wanted to make sure that this was detecting and converting into vibrations when you're 4 feet away. So you have to adjust the threshold, so you're 4 feet away, you can still detect it. And at that point, what you really should experience is just like a small disc, so that it's off most of the time, except when you're within that sort of small area. And then we came closer and just wanted to double check that if you're 1.5 feet away, you should feel like it's a lot bigger area of vibration. So what you're feeling is like a bigger disc or a bigger sphere when you're closer. So we calibrated that, we cleared the area, we marked the floor because we had 6 different angles where the experimenter would be standing, and having that marked on the floor would be useful. And then we had the participant come in, we gave the participant verbal instructions. We definitely did not tell the participant that they're searching for a light. We said that you're looking for a target and you'll feel a vibration, and it's going to be 360 degrees around you, so you've got to go and search for it. We also told the person, we want you to feel the perimeter because we thought that would really motivate exploration, and exploration is important to this feeling of merging with the device. And their only task really was to sort of tell us what the shape and size of that disc was. That was pretty much all they had to do for this portion of the experiment. Then we blindfolded them and we put this sleeve on them and we brought them into the room. We strapped the photoresistor onto their finger like such, so that when they're pointing it, the photoresistor is pointing with them. And then we took the vibrotactor, one of the wires came out, but we took the vibrotactor and we just stuffed it underneath the sleeve over here so that they'd feel the vibration on their hand. Okay, then we turned off the light. We did a sensory suggestibility experiment. So this is one that we developed. And the idea here was that the vibrotactor was already attached to their arm, and we told them, tell us when you feel the minute vibration. And then we noisily pressed the keyboard, and we said, do you feel it now? Do you feel it now? Do you feel it now? The idea being that people who are very suggestible would almost immediately be like, oh yeah, I do feel a slight vibration, whereas people who are not suggestible would probably wait much longer. So that was the test for sensory suggestibility. And then the actual experiment, we put headphones on them that played pink noise and for 30 seconds, and that gave enough time for the experimenter to go to the first position where they're going to shine the light. And after the pink noise stopped, the participants start sweeping and searching for that light source. Once they found the light source and said, oh, I found it, we'd ask, well, how big do you think it is? And we asked, what would you expect the target to feel like if you reached out and touched it? Is it imaginary or 10, a solid object? How confident were you in the bigness of your judgment? How much were you paying attention to your arm and the vibration? And did you feel like this device is an extension of yourself? And then, we had 6 trials. Each trial had a different angle. So there were 6 different angles. There were 2 different distances from the experimenter and the participant. And there were 2 different heights. One was eye level, one was waist level, to really just randomize it so that the participant really had to search the space to find the light. And we asked that set of questions every other trial. And that was pretty much it. That was our experiment. Time for the results. And this really is a special and exciting time because, again, we worked on this for a year. We met weekly. We looked at literature. We designed this thing. We troubleshooted. And then we ran the experiment. So it's kind of exciting. We ended up running only 8 people. But given the limitations, that's actually a lot. Because like we were each in our individual homes, we could only run due to COVID people with whom we were living. And so I think that's actually, it was way beyond what I thought we would be able to do. And this is our main result. Okay, so the first question was, what is the distribution of people who feel like the device is an extension of themselves? And, you know, like, let me just describe this. So the question was like, is it just 1 in a million that feels like they've merged with this device, or do many people? So just focus on the blue bar. That's for trial 1. And really of the questions that we asked, the only question that was significant was, do you feel like this device is an extension of yourself? And what you see here in trial 1 is that 2 people said, no, not really. It's very minimal. And then 5 people actually said, yeah, kind of. It kind of does feel like an extension of myself. And then 1 person said, yeah, it really strongly feels like it's an extension of myself. So there seems to be a wide distribution. You can see it's a bell-shaped curve, which is cool. So you've got some that don't, some that do, and a bunch in the middle. That's really, really cool. And the second question we had was, would people feel like the device is an extension of themselves after only several minutes of exposure? Well, forget about several moments of exposure. Even in the first trial, that's maybe like 2 minutes of exposure. What we see is that, yeah, some people feel kind of merged and 1 person feels fully merged with the device. So that's pretty extraordinary. That's pretty interesting, I think, after only 2 minutes with this device. And the other question was, well, would people feel more merged with the device with greater exposure and exploration time? So, you know, people were immersed in this device for, I don't know, like 15 minutes or so. So as time went by, the red bar over here is trial 6. I mean, you can see people are migrating from not feeling that immersed within the device, not feeling like the device is an extension of themselves, to now all of a sudden there are many more people who actually strongly feel like they are, this device is an extension of themselves. It went from 1 to 4 people. And if you do a t-test, whatever that means with 8 people, we actually got statistical significance, that the average became more strongly associated with feeling like this is an extension of yourself, which is pretty cool that we were able to quantify that. As far as I know, no one has done that with this setup. And the final question was, is there a relationship between a person's sensory suggestibility rating and how much they felt like the device is an extension of themselves? And sadly, no. What was interesting is, again, what we had done for the sensory suggestibility, this is not in the literature, I just brainstormed this, was we put the vibrotactile in here and then we audibly pressed the keyboard and said, do you feel it? Do you feel it now? And we told them that we're increasing the strength of the vibration. And so, we kept pressing it, and 7 out of 8 people never felt any vibration. Only 1 person did. So, I think it's just that the idea I brainstormed for the sensory suggestibility was not a good one. And so as a result, we did not get anyone who really felt, except for 1 person, that they were feeling a vibration. So this probably did not work out for that reason. So again, there are many limitations. We only ran 8 people. Everyone was running it in their own homes. So we're in different environments and stuff like that. But nevertheless, for the next steps, this was enough to motivate me to use this question in my actual research. So when I get back into lab and I start putting people into my machine and I put this vibrotactile vest on them that gives them a sense of how far away they are from gravitational vertical, in those experiments now I will ask them, how much do you feel like this vibrotactile belt is an extension of yourself? And I'm interested in seeing, is there a difference when they know where they are in space versus when they're disoriented? I'm interested in seeing, is there a correlation in performance? The people who feel more merged with this vibrotactile belt, are they the people who actually perform the task better when disoriented? That would be really interesting if it turned out to be the case. We may explore tactile sensory suggestibility. This method that I used didn't work, but there are other things in the literature that do. And understanding why some work and some don't is interesting research. And it's easy to do, even virtually with a group of people. The other interesting thing that came out, we had a lot of interesting ideas came out, but I'll just put one other one, is that everyone who designed this apparatus felt very minimal sensation emerging. What that maybe suggests is that when you take away the magic, when you know exactly what's happening, it's harder to merge with it. Do you need a little bit of the magic of uncertainty to feel like you're merged with a device? I don't think that's well known at all. So there are a lot of things to explore. In conclusion, this was a year-long journey. We met once a week. We did all of these different things. It was just a really cool way to interact and talk with friends and collaborators, think about something new. This is actually going to inform my actual real-life research, which is really cool. And as always, if you're interested in collaborating or exploring or having discussions, feel free to reach out.